Hello again. I'm John Locke, Dean of GW Engineering, and I'm really pleased to transition us to our next panel discussion that will return our focus to artificial intelligence. It's been a theme throughout the day, and also perhaps touch a bit on quantum computing and other bleeding edge research and technology that, for better or worse, will impact cybersecurity. We've heard many times today about the importance of greater collaboration between academia, government, and industry. And this panel has all three, so I'm very excited about that. And so in this panel, AI-powered cybersecurity and how we can stay ahead. You'll hear insights from Dr. Margaret Martinosi, who is the Assistant Director for Computer and Information Science and Engineering at the U.S. National Science Foundation, who will serve as our moderator. Dr. Martinosi is also a professor of computer science at Princeton University and is, and anyone in the field would say, she is one of the most respected academics in the field, so honored to have her here today. Joining Dr. Martinosi will be Dr. Robert Cunningham, who's the Vice Chancellor for Research Infrastructure at the University of Pittsburgh. Adam Mattina is Managing Director and Portfolio Chief Information Security Officer at Blackstone, and also an alum of the GW School of Business. And Elham Tabassi is the Associate Director for Emerging Technology in the Information Technology Laboratory at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. A reminder that please do submit your questions. They'll be received by our moderator that you'll be able to ask along the way. And then also a final reminder to check out our pan-university interdisciplinary Cyber at GW initiative using the QR code on the inside cover of your program, or go to the URL cyber.gwu.edu. And there you can learn more about our cybersecurity educational programs, research projects, faculty expertise, and outreach activities. And we invite you to partner with us to attack cybersecurity risks through educating the future workforce, research and innovation, and outreach and community engagement. With that, I'll hand things over to Dr. Martinosi.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, John. It's wonderful to be here. Good afternoon. So my name is Margaret Martinosi, and we're going to be going through a conversation here about some really important topics, right? Topics like AI, quantum, and cybersecurity have each seen major attention, both from the scientific community and from the general press. And so today what we're going to do is talk about the implications of those technologies individually, and also how together they pose new opportunities and new challenges and new threats for our world. Today's panel, as was already mentioned, includes folks from academia, industry, and government, so we'll see a broad cross-section of ideas and contexts. What I thought we would do is start, rather than sort of reading biographies, I wanted to start with having each of the panelists self-introduce for a couple minutes, just so you can sort of hear directly from them how they see these topic areas and how they bring them into what they do for their work. While we're sort of going through that round robin, I also want to tee up the fact that you're able to put questions into the app, and we will field those. So as we move deeper into the conversation, we'll be looking for questions from the audience. So please start submitting those when you get a chance. So with that, Rob, would you like to get us started on
Sure.
Introductions?
I would. So first of all, thanks to you, thanks to GW for inviting me to be here. I think there are 4 reasons I'm on this panel. First is I have a lot of experience in cybersecurity. I led the first cybersecurity group at MIT's Lincoln Laboratory, and I ran 5 consecutive ones while I was there. Second, my Ph.D. is in this thing called cognitive and neural systems, which is a combination of neuroscience and artificial intelligence. Third, I'm the executive director of the Pittsburgh Quantum Institute, so I know a little bit about quantum mechanics in general and quantum computing in particular. And fourth, my job is all about trying to connect pieces together, helping the faculty at the University of Pittsburgh work together in larger scale teams, because I fundamentally believe that you get the most interesting results when you have teams with a broad background. So that's my short intro.
Great. Thanks, Rob. Adam?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me here. My name's Adam Mattina. I lead our portfolio cybersecurity team at Blackstone. Blackstone's an investment company. We invest in all sorts of businesses all around the world. And our team's job is to measure the cybersecurity risk of the whole portfolio at large, which consists of about 200 to 250 companies all over the world, again, in every different industry. So with that, looking forward to this conversation and how we can talk about what's really happening out there in the field, on the ground, with security leaders and security teams who are dealing with, grappling with how to integrate AI into their business, how to think about quantum going forward, and what sort of threats and attacks they're seeing, and how we help to defend against them.
Thanks, Adam. Elham?
Thank you, Margaret. Thanks again for having me here. Wonderful to be here. Elham Tabassi, I'm with National Institute of Standards and Technology. That's an agency under Department of Commerce. Our mission is to help help U.S. industry with U.S. industrial competitiveness. We call ourselves the Federal Laboratory. And NIST has a long-standing tradition of cultivating trust in technology. We do that by advancing standards, measurement science, standards and measurement science that make technology more robust, more secure, more private, in other words, more trustworthy. And that's exactly what we are doing in the space of AI. I'm fortunate to lead the Trustworthy Responsible program at NIST, and my title is, as Jack said, Associate Director for Emerging Tech at Information Technology Laboratory. Glad to be here.
Thanks. And for myself, I lead the Computer and Information Science and Engineering, or CISE Directorate at the National Science Foundation. So NSF was founded 70 years ago to be the nation's all-of-science basic science research funding agency. And within that, the CISE Directorate represents about $1 billion a year of research funding that goes out. We fund about 80% of the federal funding that goes out to academic computer science in America. And from those investments, things have come like Google, like Qualcomm, and many other innovations that have helped improve both the sort of economic leadership of the country as well as cybersecurity, privacy, and so forth. So we're really proud of that legacy. As was mentioned, I'm serving at NSF while on leave from Princeton University, where I do a mixture of computer hardware design, both for classical and quantum systems. So I come at it from that research perspective as well. So we came up with some questions to get the discussion rolling a little bit. And the first one I'm going to ask is aimed at Adam, but then I'm sure others will chime in as well. So Adam, to get us started, from your perspective, can you speak to how you view cybersecurity trends today, and what are some of the key elements of emerging technologies like AI, like quantum, that might be shaping those trends?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with, the trends in cyber right now are attackers are moving towards the same places that businesses are moving. And the place that businesses have been moving over the last few years is the cloud. Okay. So what does that mean? So that means companies moving their technology systems onto AWS, Google, Microsoft, other types of platforms like that. And as companies move their information and systems there, we see attackers targeting those types of systems. So from a cybersecurity trends perspective, that's very clear as like a place of focus, and also a focus going into next year, this year and next year, of where we see CISOs focusing new products and their team's time and attention. And I think thinking about how does that relate to AI, just setting quantum aside for a second, one of the things that the cloud does is enable companies to have all these knobs and levers, really, and switches to customize endlessly how they deploy their technology in the cloud. And that introduction of more and more complexity makes cybersecurity really difficult. Mm-hmm. And it plays to the advantage of the attacker. So where we see companies focusing a lot of their time and we see the market moving is, how do we make security in the cloud more simple and easy to oversee and make the cloud easier to secure? And we see that cat and mouse game playing out, where attackers are taking advantage of very arcane or in the weeds type of capabilities of the cloud. In the meanwhile, businesses are moving fast to onboard technologies onto these new platforms. And so that whole area of increasing complexity is something that I think AI could help with. There are some I think we're in the second generation right now of some cloud security tools out in the market. But I think AI could kind of take that to the next turn of the crank of how to keep cloud security ahead, which we heard a little bit from Microsoft earlier. Of course, they're a massive leader there.
Great. Anyone else want to weigh in? Rob?
Yeah, I'll jump in for a sec. Since we're talking about AI, let me just sort of continue in that path for a little while. AI has been used in cybersecurity for quite a long time. We heard earlier today both Google and Microsoft talk about how they build it into their products for being able to protect their systems. The real difference that's happened relatively recently is that we've moved from just using, for mostly using AI for categorization problems. Is this an attack? Is it not an attack? To ones where you can actually start doing much more complicated things. So the generative AI systems on the defender side will allow you to actually get some help writing your code. You're not guaranteed that it's going to be correct, but it can be correct for many things. On the attacker side, you can take existing code and you can feed it into systems, and the generative AI systems can identify exactly where vulnerabilities are without having to write special purpose rules. So it has a much broader perspective, and it can find different things than it's found before. So there's a little positive and a little bit negative there, and maybe we'll come back later to the where we are in the whole thing. I just want to highlight one other thing, which is the training of these generative AI systems requires an enormous amount of computing power, and beyond what small companies can get to, and that's a problem that is one of the things that needs to be addressed. As I remember from earlier, you were looking for a few pointers of things that we might want to summarize. I think that's an important takeaway.
Thanks. I'm going to move on and ask Elham to help us hear more about the NIST AI risk management framework. It's been rolled out this year, and I know I and others have considerable optimism about how it might help us shape AI systems and improve our trust in them. So can you, for everyone here, talk a little bit about what the AI RMF is and how NIST is working with stakeholders, including academia, including industry, on employing it to improve trust, particularly in these kinds of systems?
Happy to, and thank you very much for that question. So as we heard and as we all know, AI is becoming the most powerful transformative technology of our time. At the same time, we also hear about its risks, it's how it can exacerbate the inequalities, the biases in the society, add to the security risks, add to the privacy risks. And while we hear from both sides of, AI is the best thing and it's going to improve our lives in a way that we don't know, and then we hear from the other side that it's the worst thing and it's going to be end of humanities, we all know that the truth is somewhere in between. And again, true to the tradition of NIST trying to cultivate trust in technologies and figure out limits and capabilities of technologies, we started a series of foundational and applied research in this area until we got a congressional mandate. So directed by a congressional mandate, NIST released a voluntary framework for managing the risk of AI in a flexible, structured, measurable way. Flexible to allow for innovations. As we all know, it's a very fast-moving field, but also flexible so that entities and organizations with different level of resources can adopt the guidance in the risk management framework for managing the risks. Structured in the way that it provides some foundations and grounds for a lexicon, an interoperable lexicons and vocabulary to talk about risks. What's a taxonomy of risks? What type of risks AI systems can impose? What do we mean by trust? What trustworthy AI systems would look like? What constitutes trust? And measurable in a way that for each of these characteristics of trustworthiness, for each of these dimensions of the risk, to be able to measure that, because if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. That's a quote from Lord Kelvin, very, very popular among us at NIST. It has been developed in an open, transparent, collaborative process. Over 18 months, we start with a request for information, rounds of drafts for public comments, workshops. All in all, we heard from more than 240 organizations, more than 600 sets of comments, numerous listening sessions. We heard from computer scientists, mathematicians, statisticians, the people that you know that they are building the systems, kind of tech developers, but also cognitive scientists, psychologists, sociologists. We also brought a philosopher on the team to consult and advise. Why? Because AI systems are more than data, compute, and algorithm, and there are complex interactions of the data, compute, and algorithm with the human, with the environment that interact. So the risks are not limited to the risks arise from data and compute and algorithm. All of the risks that are applicable to information systems and data-driven systems apply. But AI systems also have unique risks of their own. So I'll try to wrap it up very quickly by saying that where the conversations about what are the AI risks, what are the trustworthiness characteristics of AI are, and as you can notice, I'm going back and forth between risk and trustworthiness because we sort of see them as the two sides of the same coin. You decrease the risk, you improve the trustworthiness. In consultation with the community, the trustworthiness characteristics are categorized in the 7 category of valid and reliable. You want the systems to function and function reliably and correctly. Safe, secure, and resilient. That's, I think, one of the topics of this conversation here, that AI systems can come with their own vulnerabilities, data poisoning, the way that a model can be trained to do things that that's not supposed to. Privacy. Many of you has read in the articles that training data can be inferred from the model. So if you have a model trained on patient data, you can see that can be a really serious risk. Interpretable and explainable. We want the output of the AI systems to be understandable by human, and we distinguish interpretability and explainability. There are already a lot of laws on the book for some use cases, such as, for example, in the loan application, if a loan is denied, there should be an explanation why that happened. So if a machine learning algorithm is being used to look at the applications, there should be interpretability of the result of that. Then also fair with bias managed. In that category, we also did some research that bias is not just the statistical and computational bias, it's also systemic bias and human bias that can creep in the systems. And lastly, transparent and accountable. And that transparency, the way we define it, goes back on the documentation across the whole life cycle, the decisions made, how the risk has been identified and measured and managed, so that provide a way for accountability, but also going back and if something goes wrong, be able to figure out what that is. So altogether, through the 4 functions of map, measure, manage, and govern, and each of them broken down to more granular instructions, it provides guidance for managing the risk of AI in a flexible way. Sorry for the long answer, but I hope that give an idea of what AI RMF is.
That's great. That's super helpful. I'm going to start pulling in some questions from the audience when they seem to fit. So one question is kind of about the moment we're in, the inflection point that we're in. And it's basically, given that global companies have integrated some aspects of AI into their systems for a while now, why do you believe it's only now getting such vast attention from the media?
Well, all right, can I jump in? All right, so I mean, I think part of it is the new type of AI that's so powerful, the generative AI. Maybe we'll just do a little poll. How many of you have played with ChatGPT or one of the other simpler things? Well, there you go. So I think part of the reason is that the ease of use of these systems has gone way up. So you can log onto a website and within 5 minutes be playing with the particular system. So I think that's a key piece, being able to use these systems to do all manner of different things, and then to get it to produce useful results has become much easier. I'll stop at that.
Yeah, I'll just add, I agree with that. I think making it available to consumers. So now you have something that maybe was a back office, business, capability that's now been brought to the masses, and it's easy to use. So that's, I think, driven a lot of the conversation. And what we heard at lunch, about, hey, this is the hottest CEO technology topic, one of those panelists has ever heard, right? So it's really accessible. And I guess I'll try to balance the scales a little bit on the impression that, companies are broadly using AI. We're constantly talking to our companies about this. Our current impression is that there are about 5% of companies out there that are using AI or planning to, like, in the implementation phase of it right now, in production in their businesses. So there's probably some spotlight effect happening in terms of what you hear about in the media and capabilities that companies have. And there's lots of whiz-bang startup stuff that can take advantage of this AI. I think, again, that pulls a lot of attention. But broadly, I think companies are being thoughtful about how to use this because they're cognizant of customer concerns around privacy. They're cognizant around how their data is used in these models. And I think maybe we'll touch on this in a bit, is how do companies adopt these models in a way that's responsible and in a way that they feel comfortable describing that to their customers. And they're mindful of the court of public opinion on this stuff and how they're using their customers' data.
That's great. There's another question that seems to fit in here too, which is, to the degree that AI is being integrated into enterprises and cybersecurity teams, the question is for the panelists' thoughts on AI itself as an insider threat.
Yeah.
Elham?
So, right. So the topic of cybersecurity of AI and AI for cybersecurity, I think this type of to use has been discussed for a long time. And again, my personal view that AI, we all know that's coming with its own vulnerabilities. So it can, if you don't have a good handle on how to secure AI systems and then try to use it for improving the cybersecurity, I think it needs careful considerations and make sure that it's being used in a right way and its vulnerabilities are understood and mitigated and managed.
I wanted to just comment on people's data, because that's, I think, the nut of the issue here. When you interact with these AI systems, you are actually training it. You're giving it additional data that it can then use and then it can hold on to. Now, at some point, there'll be some sort of legal agreement that'll be entered into where companies will say, okay, I'm going to use this company's AI core system and I'll add my special data to it. And then the lawyers will figure out exactly who gets to use that data. And so the insider threat angle is a really interesting one right now because the law has not caught up with this part of the world. And I think it needs to at some point. But I will also point out that part of the reason I'm very hopeful about this is if you think about the attacker and the defender, what is it that gives a defender a substantial advantage? It's access and ownership and use of their own data. And so if you can work out the deals with the lawyers so that you maintain your own data, then you can use that data to be able to protect yourself better than what an adversary could, given the exact same model, but not enough specific information about your system. So an insider, but I don't think a threat.
Okay, optimism, great.
I'm trying.
Wonderful. I'm going to pivot a little bit towards quantum for the next bit. So digging in on quantum, I'm going to ask Rob to start us off here. Can you summarize the state of quantum computing overall? And similar to where we started with AI, can you speak to the potential opportunities and threats that you see with respect to cybersecurity?
Yeah, so let's just focus on quantum computing. We are in an incredibly interesting time right now. We're at the point where we can start to harness quantum mechanics to do useful things. And one of the useful things that we can do with it is quantum computing. And we have both theoretical results and experimental results now that show that quantum computers can compute things that classical computers cannot. Amazing. That is incredibly cool. Today's available commercially available or otherwise available computers, quantum computers, only have a few hundred qubits. So just for those of you who are computer scientists, a bit has a 0 or a 1. A qubit is the unit of computation in a quantum computer. It's actually an analog thing, and there's lots of cool things you can do with it. And without going into the details, let me just give you the one number that I want to share, which is today's best quantum computers have a few hundred qubits. All right, so that's where we are. Let me tell you why that matters in just a moment. What is it that we know that quantum computers can do? Well, we know that it can attack certain types of cryptography. So let's just spend a second on that. The types of cryptography that are vulnerable are public key cryptography, symmetric key to a much, much less extent, easy to fix, but public key is hard. You may or may not know that in the world of cryptography, most of the way that we do our encryption and most of the way that we guarantee certain things about the protection is that we know that certain problems are hard. And they're hard for classical computers to solve efficiently. But if you switch over and you use something like a quantum computer, it turns out that some of those problems are no longer hard. And the most commonly used algorithms that we use for public key cryptography are not hard to solve on a quantum computer if you get one of sufficient size and scale. So let's talk about that. RSA is the most commonly used public key algorithm. It's used to let you sign into your bank. That sounds like it might be important. It's used to digitally sign documents. If you've ever had to sign contracts or things like that, that sounds like that's important. And it's used for things like the blockchain and cryptocurrency and things of that type. All that sounds like it could possibly be important. So what does it take to break that? Well, there's a paper written just a couple of years ago called How to Break 248-Bit RSA, most commonly type of public key crypto, in 8 hours using a 20 million qubit quantum computer. So where we are today, a couple of hundred. Where we need to be, 20 million, give or take, given some estimates. So first thing I want to say is don't panic. Right? We've got a little bit of time, but we don't have infinite time. So it's time to plan and move to a world where we use a type of encryption that is also a hard problem for a quantum computer to solve. NIST has been all over this, run a bunch of competitions, and has down-selected to algorithms. We know how to do that. Google and Microsoft and others will build it in, and we'll have to do some testing because a little more space, a little bit slower, but it will work for us. One of the things that some of the other panels brought up was, are there suggestions for GW? Here's my one suggestion. I talked to the CFO earlier. Don't buy cryptocurrency right now. Yeah, maybe you're all on top of that already. All right, go ahead.
Thanks. Okay, so you mentioned the new generation of algorithms, these so-called post-quantum crypto algorithms. And one of the questions from the audience asks for a comparison. Should we be thinking about this kind of like Y2K? Is it that sort of feeling to the updates, or is it bigger, is it scary, or is it different?
All right, sure. You're changing the hard problem that the cryptography is solving. And what that means is that a little more computation has to be done. And today's classic computer chips have special instructions built into them that make the currently used crypto really fast, really efficient. And we haven't built that yet for the new post-quantum crypto. So it's not going to be a disaster, but it'll be slower. And the size of the keys that you need in many cases is larger, and so there'll need to be more storage. So we can make it work now on programmable systems, but it isn't as efficient as the old one, and it'll take us a while to get there. And the one thing I'll bring up is that for nation states, you can actually record all of the data that's transitioning right now, and at some point in the future, you'll be able to decrypt it. And we don't know exactly when, but 20 million qubits from now is roughly when you'll get there.
I will add that I believe 3-4 years ago, National Academy did a study about exactly this, that how far we are from breaking the public key encryptions. Again, nobody should panic, but I think the time is now to think about post-quantum encryptions and the work that NIST is doing and the standards that's going to come out in a couple of years.
Great. So I think some of the questions that are coming in have to do with sort of broader tech policy trends and inflection points. So for example, emerging technology, AI, quantum, and so forth, it has significant risks that it plays out in terms of national security. So how are academia, government, and the investment industry accounting for national security in terms of how we go about what we do, how it affects research, investments, plans, and so forth?
Okay, yeah, sure. So, I think from the private sector side, our firm is very committed to working with the government and however, we can help. And I think one of the areas where we can contribute is really sharing like what we see and what we see as the trends to inform the government's, areas of focus or areas where they can be inclusive in terms of like considering certain situations. I think we heard that from another, panel, maybe the last panel actually that was up here, was thinking about how do we bring together these different viewpoints. And so, I think from our firm's perspective, we benefit from a very wide optic, right? So we're looking across a representative sample really of the economy with companies, a lot of companies that are small, medium-sized, mid-sized, larger companies, et cetera, different levels of sophistication in cybersecurity and technology and different types of business priorities. And we can help consolidate that, I think, and help the government understand, where the pain points are really on the ground, to then take that as input and bake it into, policy or direction or guidance in NIST. I think like NIST is actually a great example where it's tough to have a security conversation without somebody being like, oh yeah, NIST 853, or like, oh, this is another thing, and like this new regulation is going to be NIST thing, and it's like, yeah. We're talking about these ties all the time, really, from an operational perspective of how do you do security in a company, and then from a requirements perspective, from products, where we're looking, okay, we're going to buy a product, or we want to use we're going to buy a product or use a vendor. Okay, well, is that vendor compliant with this, or we need them to adhere to this policy or this thing, and so we see that in some of our government contracting areas or government places where we have companies that provide service to the government. So we're hooked in, I think, on both sides of this. Whether and most of it actually comes to NIST. It's like, what's the guidance that NIST is providing, and how can we be an input into that to inform the government on like this is what's happening out in the playing field, and this is like our view of where it should go.
If I can, I just want to give a +1 onto interdisciplinary, open, transparent processes. Bring people of different perspectives, different players around the table, and get the conversations going, so that the guidance that NIST writes is always informed by a very wide sector of the academia, industry, the people that are going to use it, and I think this is really important. So again, a lot of emphasis on making sure that diverse representations, backgrounds, thoughts, and viewpoints, interdisciplinary, and running open, transparent processes to make these guidance technically solid, clear, and implementable.
If I might, I think I'm going to put on my academia hat for a moment and field this one as well. So I think a lot of us who do research in the areas of computing and engineering have a passion for seeing our work have beneficial impact. The whole notion of the ivory tower doesn't really fit the motivation and the style that most computing researchers are driven by. And so, I think we do see many academics eager to have their work have impact, We see increasing use of open sourcing as one way to sort of get ideas out there for broad adoption, in some cases commercialization, in some cases remaining out in the open source domain primarily. I also think we see academics engaging in the different kinds of standards, processes, and RFIs as additional ways to have impact. And finally, we clearly see pathways from academia into the startup space and people with innovative techniques that they're bringing out as small disruptive companies into this space. So I think there's plenty of passion for having impact out of the academic world. And increasingly, we're seeing universities reconfigure and adjust their approach to support those kinds of desires for beneficial impact. We're also seeing agencies like NSF and others tool up for helping with that sort of last mile to impact aspect of how we fund and how we support research. So the new Technology Innovation and Partnerships Directorate at NSF is one example of kind of reconfiguring a federal agency to better support that technology translation. But I think there are many folks who are sort of passionate about having that impact. One great example is, NSF invested in the underpinning technologies of differential privacy about, 12 years ago. And if you participated in the US Census in 2020, you benefited from those technologies in terms of them supporting useful census data while maintaining individual privacy protection. So this notion of from theory to practice is something that a lot of us feel very passionate about. And at NSF, we're always working to design programmatics that help build on that. We have a live request for information right now about retooling our cybersecurity program. So if you Google maybe NSF cybersecurity RFI, maybe you'll find it. Please participate. Did you want to come in as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think I heard the research answer that I like a lot, and I'd like to add to it the workforce development piece as well, which is the other thing that academia does. So when I asked for that quick poll earlier, about 80% of you had tried ChatGPT or some sort of it. And the process that you had of asking it to produce something for you, you should realize that what you were doing was programming it to give you the answer that you want. And we haven't quite figured out how you program these things in that way. And so, part of the things that academia does is it figures that out and teaches people how to be able to do that in interesting ways. And so there's going to be entirely new fields that'll come out of this. There'll be entirely new jobs. Maybe that's one example. I mean, the other one will be people who program quantum computers. They have to be programmed in totally different ways, and so there needs to be new degree programs as well.
Great. So we're coming into the home stretch. If you have more questions, please enter them soon. But meanwhile, I'm going to ask this question from the audience. Is there a player that hasn't been brought to the table yet for these conversations, or are all the right folks already talking? So who's missing from the conversation right now?
I don't know about missing in the conversations, because at least from our side, from this side, we have been trying to reach out. But I think the conversations that we had today impacted community. I think it's also important to reach out to the impacted community and try to understand and see things from their point of view. In the AI RMF that I talked about, one of the other things that we do as part of the structured way and interoperable lexicon is providing definition for AI systems, definition of risk, a life cycle for AI systems, and also define the different AI actors, the different people that are involved at the different stages of plan and design, data collection, building the model, validation, verifications, putting it into use, and continual monitoring. And we define the roles and responsibility for the different AI actors across each of these stages of the life cycle. But right in the middle and the center of all this, we put people and planet, because again, AI systems are all about the context of use, the interactions. So in any of these conversations, I think getting the voice of the impacted community is extremely important to understand the risks and mitigating and managing of those risks.
So one of the things that we've mentioned is about impacted communities. We've spoken about some systems that are fundamentally very large scale, right? LLMs and quantum. Can we speak a little bit to how we might best, and we spoke about who's at the table and who maybe isn't. So how might we best balance and democratize access to these important technologies so that we really are including and enabling everyone with a good idea? Right now, the access to LLMs is in some ways very open. We can all experiment with them, and in some ways, quite close, right? The barriers to entry to creating LLMs are quite high, and quantum systems as well. So how do we balance all of that and make sure that we can make use of the full talent that we have in this country?
I can probably say a few words about the National AI Research Resource. A task force was put together as part of the AI Act of 2020 to look at exactly what Margaret talked about, democratizing access to data and compute. And in the voice of one of the task force members, to reboot the research ecosystem of US by giving access to data and compute to universities, entities of any size to be able to use it for educations, but also for innovations and research. That task force delivered their final report on January 23rd, I believe, and there was a public event on, I think, March 2nd, and it talks about and provides an implementation plan for how to build a federated cyber infrastructures for access by basically anybody in the US to do the type of research that's right now is sort of limited to a smaller group of the community. There's a lot of hope that that will be implemented. Of course, it requires a action from Congress, and we will be all watching to see what happens with there.
Great. So we have a big clock here that's ticking down. And so I'm wondering if we might shift gears. And for each of you, would you like to kind of give one takeaway nugget? We were joking in the back about what's the one thing you disagree with most today. But you don't have to do that. You can say something you really hope for people to remember.
Okay, I'm going to say AI will not get rid of all the jobs. There'll be others, and you'll have to learn how to program them. You'll have to learn how to do these other sorts of tasks with quantum computers. We probably don't want to fear it. I'm going to go for two things, maybe. I don't think we should fear it, because there are techniques that you can use to ensure that AI does certain things and not other things. So in cybersecurity, many of you know the differences between a C programming language and a Python or Java. There's memory safety issues that you literally can't create when you use one programming language versus the other. I just wrote a paper on a new programming language that literally can't construct a communications protocol with a crypto error of a certain type. Right? There's a bunch of things like this. So my one thing is, it's not all doom and gloom. We will figure it out, but it's going to take us time.
Okay, I'm going to just take a different type of, make a different type of statement for everyone. And sometimes I think it's good to, sometimes we have to recognize that we're in such a fortunate kind of forum that it's helpful to take a step outside of our sphere. And so I want to kind of say two things. One is, there might be a number of you in the audience who are not like total technical gearheads, all right, and you're interested in cybersecurity. If you're worried that like, man, I like really gotta get much more high end on this, I don't know if I can do this thing, let me put you at ease that there is a job for you, okay, in cybersecurity. So you do not have to be a technical expert. You don't have to be, to have a career in cybersecurity. In fact, I think, I strongly believe that if we're gonna close the skills gap, we gotta bring net new people into this field. It's tough to grow them, from the ground up. and there's a lot of work to be done. So let me motivate you that
It's a fun field.
Yeah, it is fun. I mean,
Yeah,
it's like super cool and fun, and we have a lot of fun doing it. And we need people, and we have people on our team for sure who come from different backgrounds, educational backgrounds, and like contribute in a lot of different ways. And so I would just want to reassure people in the audience that if you're maybe don't look like the archetype, or you have an archetype in mind, that there's still a spot for you for sure in the field. And the second thing I think is, like, as I marinated on the last question of like who is not represented, or like what are we not talking about? I think there's kind of one thing steps in mind is like I have young kids, and like I saw something the other day. It was like, oh, people were worried about Excel, and like their job was to be a calculator and like change accountants were worried about Excel, and so then Excel became a big kind of fearful moment. But now it's a tool that everybody knows how to use. Well, in fact, like this technology that we're talking about very well could be that. It's not necessarily going to be the tool just for technical experts or subject matter experts. It very well is going to become a tool for everyone, I think demonstrated by the very smartly asked poll that we did before. So I think we need to think about who's not represented is really the masses in some of these conversations. Is how are we thinking about those folks, especially younger folks, to get them capable in how to think about these tools like just any tool that they would have, and not necessarily only the subject matter experts. So I think those are the two thoughts I'd leave you with in terms of stepping outside of the sphere that we're in right now. Is there's a spot in cybersecurity for you, absolutely, and number two is that there's a whole wide audience of folks out there that are going to be impacted by AI, and how do we help them be productive and use it in a way that's productive to raise the tide for everybody.
Thanks, Adam.
I'll be very quick. This is a really exciting time. For any of you that's excited about and passionate about innovations, technology that can work for everybody, technology that reflects our value, this is a really exciting time. 20 years ago, when I was building models and programming different machine learning algorithms, I was doing it because I can and I could, and I was just building models because that was the ability that I had. Many of our today's generations, including my kid that's working in this area, they're not only motivated by the question that, can I do it, but should I do it? And I think that's a really exciting and important shift in our culture to make sure that we know the impact of technology, and we build, again, technologies that reflect our values and reflect our society. So it's a very exciting time.
How wonderful. Well, thank you all for your time and your attention.